So this is an update on my experience with quitting kratom. I wanted to document my experience with this because I have a long history using kratom and have quit it and restarted taking it many times over the last 10 years. And when I choose to quit every time, it is quite a chore and is not easy. So I found a lot of value in listening to other people's experiences on YouTube with quitting kratom, and I wanted to kind of contribute to that community, and maybe this can help somebody, or at the very least, I'm just going to document it for the sake of documenting it. But where we're at right now is, so I guess a bit of context. As I mentioned in my previous video, the kratom is a plant where the flesh of the leaves, or the leaves of the plant, are dried and crushed up and then consumed. Either what's common is the flesh of the leaf is powderized, and then the powder is mixed with water and completely drank. And then the other way of taking it that I'm familiar with is the crushed leaf form, which is the entire leaf, so the stem and vein as well as the flesh, more coarsely crushed and then brewed like a tea, and then the plant material is filtered out and like with a strainer or whatever, and then just the liquid is consumed. And what I found is that so apparently the stem and vein have different alkaloids in it that are not psychoactive, but they mitigate withdrawal symptoms. And so it's been a very helpful way of weaning myself down and then completely coming off the kratom, as opposed to trying to wean down or go cold turkey with the powdered version. So for the last, let's say, a year, I've been, or I guess more like 6 months, because I did quit about 6 months ago for a short time. So for the last 6 months, I've only been drinking the crushed leaf version of the plant, with the exception of the last 3 weeks where I decided to use the powder form again. And very quickly I was reminded that the powder form is quite a bit harsher than the crushed leaf tea. It's harsher on the body. It seems to be more, it triggers more cravings throughout the day for the powder. And there's just a more significant kind of come up and plateau, and then a come down to it. So luckily I kind of pulled myself together after 3 weeks and realized that I don't want to go down the path of using powder long term, and I've been wanting to quit completely for a while now, so that's the plan. So I threw out all of the powder that I had and then switched back to just the crushed leaf tea. And I did experience some withdrawal symptoms from cutting the powder out. I was fairly low energy throughout the day, kind of low mood, really not very motivated, had a little bit of body aches or soreness, and a little bit of trouble sleeping and staying asleep. The worst withdrawal symptom out of all the symptoms for me personally is the restless leg syndrome, but more like a restless full body agitation that happens. But using the crushed leaf, that was mostly mitigated, except for in the morning when I'm still in bed and I'm starting to wake up. usually what would wake me up and get me out of bed is just tossing and turning because my body feels so uncomfortable. But after about 4 days after stopping the powder, my body and mind pretty much balanced out. And then I was kind of just back to the state where I'm consuming the crushed leaf tea. So at that point, I decided to, or my plan was and is, and what I'm doing right now, is weaning down the tea. So for the last about 4 days, I've gone from about 7 tablespoons of crushed leaf, which, just for context, that dosage, 1 teaspoon of powder is about equivalent to 1.5 tablespoons of the crushed leaf, because it's a just larger course, and so there's a lot of air that gets trapped between the leaves when you're measuring it out with a spoon. So I went from about 9 tablespoons, and then I dropped it down to 5 tablespoons. And it's been an interesting experience. So I find that kratom builds a tolerance very quickly, but it also drops its tolerance very quickly. And my pattern of usage in general is pretty much where I would have a small dose every 2 hours throughout the day. And so with that, it's almost more like a self-medicating type of behavior as opposed to a drug abuse behavior, because it keeps me at a very level state of mind as opposed to the ups and downs that you get with kratom. And so if I were to dose every 2 hours while I'm fairly aggressively weaning, then all day I would be in kind of like a moderate state of withdrawal. And so what I find to be a lot better and easier is to push that 2 hours into 4 to 6 hours. And kind of what I've had to do in my mind is to really muscle through those extra hours, because after about 2 hours I start to experience the withdrawal symptoms, which I go like this because I've been starting to think that it's not even withdrawal, it's actually the come down from kratom, which a lot of people say when, and what I've even experienced when I first start taking kratom, is there's not really a come down. You kind of just return to your baseline. But if you're using it on a regular basis every day, then there starts to become a come down. And so after about 2 hours, I would start to experience the negative effects, whether it's withdrawal or a come down. And what I found to be a lot better of a way to go about it is to just accept in my mind that I'm going to be experiencing those negative symptoms that start at that 2 hours, and I'm going to push through to 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and then have the minimum effective dose to reduce those symptoms back to my baseline. And so what I've found is that when I do it like this, just those couple hours where I am going through the withdrawal and I'm not consuming any kratom, my my tolerance seems to lower to the point where my next dose, even though it is significantly smaller than the dose that I would normally be taking every 2 hours, it is actually really quite effective to the point that it stops the withdrawals, and the withdrawals stay away for like usually 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. And oftentimes after 2 or 3 hours there is the come down, and I'm calling it a come down now because when I push through it for about an hour, sometimes 2 hours, those symptoms disappear, and then I find myself kind of at a normal baseline, for my regular standard of being sober and normal. Now what I've found is this is where it can kind of get tricky, because first of all, it feels really good to use my discipline again, which when I'm using kratom regularly, I definitely let my discipline slip. And so when I get into the habit over a few days of pushing through those 4 to 6 hours and then taking the minimum dose required to mitigate the symptoms, I start to think that I can have control over my habit now, and that I can just use it on this pattern of use long term. And it seems like as soon as I, in my mind, then go back to saying, okay, I'm going to allow myself to use this on a regular basis long term, that conviction to use it responsibly somehow just gets forgotten, and I go back to seeking that kratom as my number one way of regulating my state of mind. And so as soon as I have it in my mind that anytime I need a pick-me-up or motivation or to feel good or energy or whatever it is, that kratom's going to be there, then I'm right away back to using it every couple hours, and then pretty much within 3 days, if I let it slip, my usage goes right back up to using too much too often, and then it comes with a lot of the negative side effects that I mentioned in my other videos. But things like just having a lack of interest in pretty much everything in life other than cheap dopamine hits. So the key is to remind myself and stick to it that this is not how I'm going to use kratom regularly. This is a path to coming off of it completely. And I don't want to drag out that weaning process. I find that about 5 to 10 days is ideal. And for those first 3 or 4 days, doing a really aggressive taper and experiencing pretty uncomfortable days. But then for those last 2 or 3 or 4 days, kind of allowing things to balance out at just a tiny amount. And when I do that, like I say, it's like that tiny amount goes a long way, to the point where I'll push through pretty mild withdrawal symptoms for half of my day, and then one small dose will allow me to feel completely normal for the rest of the day. And then at that point, the key is to then completely stop. And in the past, when I've done that, I've still experienced about 3 days of a little bit harsher withdrawals, which usually feel a lot like coming down with the flu or with a bad cold, where there's just a lot of lethargy in the body, kind of restlessness at the same time, and low mood, kind of higher anxiety, things like that. But ultimately, relatively mild symptoms. And then after day 4, day 5, things very quickly kind of come back online and feel a lot better. So that's what I'm kind of reminding myself and coaching myself to keep in mind right now, because right now I think on 4 or 5 tablespoons per day, and tomorrow my goal is to have 3, and probably stick at 3 for the rest of the week, and then on the weekend I'm gonna try to go cold turkey after that. One more thing I want to kind of touch on, and I'll talk more about this at another time, but one of the things that I try to hold in my mind when I'm looking ahead to, a week off of it, 2 weeks off, and then it just gets better from there, is kind of this I guess testosterone influenced mentality, where I've heard people say that kratom abuse lowers testosterone. There is studies that show that opiates lower testosterone. The only effect that I experience from that is kind of the mental aspect, which is that little bit of an edge or aggressiveness to pursue the activities of life, I guess, and kind of that stoic stability and calmness that comes with testosterone. And so I think about that. I think about what it'll feel like when kind of that vigor for life starts to come back, and then the enjoyment of exercise and working out comes back, the interest in activities comes back, and that's where I'm at right now. I think I had another point that I was gonna go to off of that, but I lost it. So I'm gonna call it there for the video. I just want to say I appreciate anybody that tunes in and comments. It's very cool to see that there's actually 1 or 2 or 3 people that watch my videos, and I hope that if you're in a similar position to mine, that this can help you out in some way. But that's it for now. We'll talk to you later.